Não é tempo técnico, mas é intervalo aqui no podcast. Já imaginou se seu time tivesse um seguro para não perder nunca? Pois é, isso não existe. Mas com a Zurich Seguros, quem não perde nunca é você. Na Zurich Seguros, os planos se adequam às suas necessidades em qualquer momento da sua vida. Seja seguro de auto, residência, vida e muito mais. Diferente de alguns times, na Zurich Seguros você pode confiar. Para saber mais, acesse zurich.com.br ou consulte seu corretor.
Sair da escola já com uma formação profissional no currículo? Parece bom demais pra ser verdade, né? Pois é. No ensino técnico do Senac, isso é possível. É ensino médio junto com formação técnica, que acontece durante os 3 anos. Lá, eles usam metodologia para projetos, desenvolvendo competências como resolução de problemas, pensamento crítico e colaboração, além de valores éticos e sustentáveis. Quer saber? Senac. Acesse sp.senac.br/ensino médio e saiba mais.
Back with another episode of Keeping Current with Kansas City. This is Thad Bell from the KC Soccer Journal. Daniel Sperry, KC Star on the other side of my little laptop screen here. How are you today, sir?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. How about you?
I'm a little tired. I think I'm just wore down from the season and too many road trips to St. Louis, and 2 of them in a week. So
It's definitely, I definitely feel the worn down at the end of a season feels. That's for sure.
while we wanted one more meaningful game for the Current, I'm sure we are also okay with not having to worry too much about covering a game. Although I'll be there. I'll be at the NWSL Championship. Will you?
Yes, I will. I will be at the ship, as they say. Um, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a good week. I think there's like we'll dive into the game. I think for people who cover the team and like there's obviously like that like dang, it'd have been really cool to cover them in the championship year, but there's also like the breadth of what's been a really long year for soccer in Kansas City and a very busy one of it like okay, like this is a much more relaxed coverage of a final versus like I've covered 3 finals now: 2017 Open Cup, 2022 NWSL Championship, and the 2020 of course the Open Cup final this year. And I think boy they're like emotionally draining weekend events, I feel like, just because there's so much intensity around all the games, even if you're not like having a true rooted interest in it, like the way those games feels very weird compared to just like normal coverage, just because there's just a heightened level of intensity at the moment that you're covering. And I for one am disappointed that we don't get to have a current home game for the final, but I'm also kind of relishing the ability to flip a switch off of like high intensity mode finally after
Yeah.
a very long year.
I will say I'm in the same similar boat. I mean, I admit that I root for these teams. I am a Kansas City Soccer fan. I do everything I can to remain objective about how I cover the team. So I mean, I will criticize or praise based upon what I think, not with the various colored glasses. But it's nice to have sometimes that investment in a team, and then
Mhm.
it's also sometimes really horrible to have that investment in a team and walk
Yeah.
away from like something you're trying to maintain that objectivity and say, oh yeah, they should have done this, they could have done that, if only this or that, and it's sometimes difficult, but I don't know. I'll need to count how many games I've covered as a final now. It's been a few, but not.
It's been quite a few for you
Yeah, that just means I'm
because
old.
you're old.
Yes, I admit it, man. I went there first.
I think we went there simultaneously, so
But it is disappointing because I would like to have that intensity for this game to be like, on the sideline
yeah.
shooting and kind of rooting for the Current. but I just feel like it's going to build to something else. Like I always feel like a lot of times to win a championship, you have to have gotten close. They got close a
Hmm.
couple years ago and then just fell off the face of the friggin' earth.
Yeah.
Uh,
We'll definitely talk about that one a little bit more because I think Lo LaBonta had some really good comments to say about
yeah.
that. So,
Well, let's just get diving into that then. Orlando won 3-2 over the Current. Current got the
mhm.
first goal. However, Orlando was not to be denied at that point, and it did feel kind of a little bit of a tale of two halves. First half was pretty even, I would say. Second half, I think Orlando was the better team. What'd you see?
They were the better team in the final third.
Yeah,
I think that's what it was. And the clinical nature of Barbara Banda's finish, like they were able to get the ball to their star player in a favorable position. Um, it's the first game so far that Kayla Sharples has put a foot wrong. She does not go into that challenge with Banda in the right spot. She allows her to turn her instead of keeping her in front of her and keeping her body goal side of Banda the whole time. I like the aggressiveness and trying to poke that ball out of there before it gets to Banda, but Banda has nowhere to go if Sharples just kind of stays on her hip there, and so I think that really does them in because then at that point, especially by the time Marta scores what was an incredible goal, um, the at that point it's panicked. You've got numbers forward. You're pushing for the equalizer, and the game gets kind of away from you. So I'm not necessarily like trying to chalk up Marta's goal to a lack of insane ability and quality is what she showed on that goal.
she
But at
did.
the same time, that goal doesn't happen if in the game state if it's level. That goal doesn't happen in a game state if the Current are winning. Um, that's one of those that the way that goal played out was because the Current were trailing and were pushing for an equalizer and had a lot very high line, a lot of numbers forward in that moment. But that moment doesn't happen if Banda doesn't get the chance that she does. And so I think that's the thing that like the Current truly outside of the penalty kick had one true solid chance in that second half, and that was the one that Doyle saved off the not Doyle. Was it Doyle or was it Sam's? One of the defenders saved it off the line from
I think it
Nichelle
was
Prince.
Sam's, but I could be wrong.
The ball rebounds back out to Tema Chawinga and she blazes it over. And I think like that moment versus Banda's moment, those are the two moments that are the difference in the outcome of this game. Because I do think if the Current ended up getting that next goal, getting the equalizer earlier, I think they end up getting a winner, or at least pushing that thing to extra time. So I am uh it's one of those that the first half was pretty even, but that second half was all Orlando, and I think in terms of the quality of play on both ends of the field, and that was that was it.
How much do you feel like Lowe coming out maybe played a role in that? Because we know she was playing hurt. We didn't know how hurt
Mhm.
when she showed up on the report, the availability report. But she's not the only player that can play there. They made good moves, but just maybe that intensity that Lowe brings maybe gave Orlando a little bit more of an edge in the second half.
Yeah, I think that's probably um, a fair statement. Excuse me, gosh, I'm so yawny tonight. It's not great. I think I think too like there's a level like the communication and the organization that Lowe brings. I have yet to I don't know that like that back line is an extremely vocal back line with each other yet, and I think there's some of that just has to do with the amount of time they've played together. But Alana Cook doesn't strike me as like a super vocal player on the field, and either does Sharples, and especially not Haley Mace. And so, a lot of that vocal leadership in the middle comes from Low and some of that organization. And I think that, you know, there's a couple of moments where the Pride were really able to uh off, get the Current out of shape. Either with the first goal, especially the first goal, and on that second goal. That I think Banda is turning Sharples at the 18, but she's doing it almost on the right side of the 18, that means that the Current back line had shifted so far over that Sharples was on the right side of the penalty spot. Like those are things that organization talking through marking and stuff like that when the ball's out of play, on throw-ins and set pieces and stuff like that create those, and little plays that create those moments that led to Banda's second goal for sure. That's where Lowe's missed, and so in just that talking through things. So I'm as much as on the field, I think she was missed. I think in terms of play, and from a leadership standpoint, I think the Current, there wasn't a ton of vocal leadership left on that field.
Well, we rely on Schultz also to do some of that, I think, in there, and
Correct.
perhaps again, not trying to blame anybody here because teams win, teams lose. Um, you like you said, Sharples had barely put a foot wrong since she came to Kansas City, and she had a couple of issues here in this game, but it was also against fantastic players,
Yeah.
against the top of the table team at their home. All of those things come into play there. So, there's a whole lot of defenders this year that haven't been able to contain Banda or
Yeah.
Timois.
And
And
very good ones at that.
yeah, um,
So,
it's, so all those things come into play. Low getting out, Timois obviously playing hurt. How long was she down in pain when she was taken down that one time? All those things come into play that maybe she wasn't as, I trust the medical staff to know that she can play. I just wonder if
mhm.
perhaps it would have been better to bring in other players who were healthy, and that changes the type of attack they do. Because we've seen them do well without Timois,
Yeah.
but but there's absolutely no reason you would think like, oh, Flacco shouldn't play Timois because obviously she's MVP type player here.
hmm
They haven't announced that yet, right?
Not yet.
Okay. Coach of the year though, they announced that today, right?
They announced that and Rookie of the Year.
Ah, who was rookie?
Croy.
What a surprise!
I'm not surprised. Kind of
No,
hard to deny someone who leads the league in assists for 17 games played.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
kind of ridiculous.
yeah, no. There's not a real argument there. I mean, I still think Claire had to be in that mention, and she was, but I
Yeah.
understand why. But anyway, I'd been kind of busy running around today and being also a little bit mind uh, wasted out here because of driving into the middle of the night. But I just think all of those things came into play. It's just if those players are healthy or a little healthier, that game goes a little bit differently, perhaps. One or two things happen differently in the year, and the Current aren't facing them at Orlando on the semifinal. And maybe that's a completely different game being played at CPKC. You don't know. There's, ifs, ands, buts, all those things.
Yeah.
Credit to Current, credit to Orlando, credit to, well, top four teams have all been magnificently good this year for the, I
Yeah.
mean, we've talked about this in the past some, but just four teams are all like a hair's breadth apart essentially
Mhm.
in the final table.
And they gave us fantastic semifinals.
Yeah,
Both games were phenomenal.
no doubt. So the
Home
final should be
teams,
good.
you talked about you talked about this a little bit. There were a couple of things go differently for the Current in this season. To me, instantly comes to my head the home game against Chicago and the home game against Louisville. Those two, that's 4 points dropped. That puts the Current in second place. Not even talking about the Orlando game. They could lose that game if they don't give up those late goals to Louisville or Chicago earlier in the year. They don't give up, gosh, they got the rainout game, the 1-1 draw in Houston. That
Yeah,
ridiculous goal that they gave up earlier in the season. Those are games that, all of a sudden the Currents in the conversation for the Shield, or they're at least the second seed, and they're
right.
playing that game against a different opponent, and they're playing it at home. And
Yeah,
I think those are the things that, like, you know, this is versus what goes on with the MLS. This is why I love the way the NWSL has made the regular season matter. Because when you get in these one-off playoff games, the home team usually wins. And you put yourself in the best position possible, and you earn those home games by performing in the regular season. And it is a little unlucky for the Current that the three other teams decided to think that they could break the NWSL record for the greatest season ever all in the same year.
Right.
Just, like, I mean, dead serious. You take this current season, you drop it into any other NWSL season, they run away with the Shield. And so it's one of those things of like, this is such a weird year, and the margins at the top of the table were that small. And in these games, the margin for errors was that small. I mean, it's just simply hip positioning that change the moment that changed the entire game is Banda's goal, and it's just a simple hip positioning from Sharples
Yeah.
where she allows herself to get turned, and like those are minute details that make or break everything in a salary cap league, and a point where you have four teams that are this talented, this good, fighting at the top of the standings. And you look at the game between Gotham and Washington. I mean, Gotham probably should have put that game to bed before Washington got their equalizer. And then, you get into the penalty kick shootout, and you have three great players take penalty kicks, and they're all terrible penalty kicks. They're terribly executed, and the goalkeeper saves them all. It's fine margins
Yeah.
that separates everyone, and it's cool to see from an overall standpoint. But when you're on the losing end of it, those are the moments where you kick yourself, because you think of, man, those moments in the regular season. And for me, really, the two that the most that really stuck out of my head is the points dropped at home from winning positions in stoppage time.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I think end up being the hardest to swallow.
It would be fun and heartbreaking to go through the season and list probably a dozen different spots where one tiny little thing changes that season to be
Hmm.
just a little bit better.
Yeah,
Michelle Cooper being taken out by a referee. I mean,
yeah.
balls bouncing off a post off of another player and going in. Just little things.
Yep.
If it was the team from the second half of the season all season, they're probably a much better chance of being at the top of the table, and everything's a little bit different. That doesn't mean they would have won. That still doesn't, there's no proof that they would have won. You can't do that. Um, but it just would have been a lot better chance. I don't know if we really need to talk a ton more about the game at the moment because they lost. They put in a good effort.
Hmm.
A 90th plus 13 PK made it
Hmm.
close. They had another
Yeah.
couple of minutes to at least, go for a chance. Schultz up there in the box on peak on corners. So it would have been a storybook ending, but it wasn't. But it
Nope.
is a storybook ending for Orlando, a team that has not been a great team a lot of years. So
Has never done anything
yeah,
outside of this year.
yeah.
So, yeah. No, it's gonna be it's
And what
super cool.
and they made a commitment. They went out and spent was it the second largest transfer in women's history for Banda, something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
So they went out
Spent
and
a
made
lot of
that.
money to get Banda. They get Adriana. I know they didn't, everyone's talking about Luana that didn't get to play.
Right.
Luana's an incredible player. Um, look at what they did with the back line and how they built that up. And then for me, like Angelina in the midfield is a really good player, and she was not very well used by Seattle last season, and I think kind of got like sent out. And she goes to Orlando, and she's one of the starting cogs in that midfield. I mean, it's just like, dude, like they're and it's also why Seb Hines has won Coach of the Year,
Yep.
because there's a lot of players on that team that, look at even Marta. Marta could barely go 65 minutes. A couple like last year, she could barely play more than 60 minutes. Now she's out there going 113 and at 38 years old and dicing up players late in the game in that manner. That's one of the all-time greatest. Like I know it hurts for current fans, and I know I caught some flack on Twitter from somebody saying that Marta doesn't know how to regulate her emotions, so we shouldn't be able to celebrate this goal. One of the most ridiculous things I've ever had someone said to me.
Yeah. You,
Um,
you don't have to like
it's
her.
You
You
don't have
don't
to
have,
like her.
right.
You do need to acknowledge greatness, though, and the
Yes.
moment that
I
that was
mean,
goal was. She is one of the greatest players to ever play the women's game,
yes,
bar none. Stop.
there's no
Period.
doubt.
That's
I
it.
don't like
That
her.
goal is one of the greatest in NWSL history, bar none.
Yeah.
Stop.
But I don't like her, but she is a fantastic goal. She's an amazing player. I will be glad to see her gone at some point. So, um, for so many levels,
There's a lot of people that will be happy to see Marta gone because she has terrorized them for so long.
there'll be like a
Um,
defenders union meeting saying "Yay!" But
Finally. Now
all
you
right,
got
man.
more to worry about with Banda and Chewinga and everyone else. So
Yes, they do. And so much talent in this league at this point. It's
and
amazing.
it is, and whoever else comes over next year.
Yeah, because we know that, and we've already discussed this. We're gonna have a kind of a official season end look forward podcast probably next week
Hmm.
sometime, and we'll try to have all the data to look forward with as much as possible. Although there is an article in the KC Soccer Journal that kind of lists the Nolan contract situation on the current. If anybody wants to look, Chad Smith wrote that up, I think, sometime this last couple of days. Anyway, uh, he's usually very good at keeping track of all that. We might need to get a couple answers on a couple things to make sure that, but that's a good start. So going forward, NWSL championship this weekend. Well, there's anything else you want to talk about the current before we look at that real quick?
No. Um, I mean, I think, in long run and looking at this team, like this feels much more sustainable what they've built in
Yes.
this year than 2022. I think like I was there at that final. I covered that team all year long. Like that team looked like they were great at some points and dead in the water at other points, and they were phenomenal. They squeaked through the playoffs, losing players left and right with severe injuries and just a whole lot of chaos. And somehow they squeaked their way into the final and got outplayed by a much better team. And they tried
Um,
to reload their
a much
roster and
deeper
off
team.
much deeper team, and they tried to reload their roster in the off season, and then the whole Matt Potter thing went to crap, and the some of it not his fault, some of it his fault. Camille Ashton no longer part of the picture now. Too, that a lot of bad contracts brought on in that winter transfer window and summer transfer window. If you go back to the transfer window before that 20, I mean, really the three windows there from that summer um, with the current in 22 going from summer 22 through summer 23, a lot of poor contracts put on there, and players that were on the team that were not injured, that were injured, or players that were brought over on high dollar contracts that are on their fourth or fifth ACL injury, just never saw the field in an NWSL game. There's like just there was a lot of stuff that was there that that did not feel sustainable in any way, shape, or form. And I think where the current roster is now and what they've got to cook with in the coming years, the players that they have under contract and everything like that is like really like fans should feel like they have a window open now
Yeah.
that is actually open and reasonably open, barring severe catastrophic health breakdowns,
I mean, there can always be injuries, and that's sometimes just, the
the
luck of the
nature.
draw.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nature of the game of any sport. And sometimes teams just have bad luck with that. But yes, there were so many players brought in, like, okay, that's, that player is a great player. I'm not going to try to like specifically name anything. And we talk about like why they could be great in this league, but they were not the right time. They weren't the right fit. They were 4 years too late. It felt like they were always swinging for the fences and wearing themselves out doing so with every move they made. and going deeper in a hole. It's like sometimes you have to, rule of thumb is when you're in a hole, don't keep digging. And that's felt like what they kept doing. And it took a lot of changes between the current sporting director. What's his title? Director of soccer operations, sporting director, Vlaco,
Yeah,
and
whatever. I don't know.
Caitlin Carducci.
Hmm.
Uh, they cleaned up a lot of those contracts. They got a lot of players under contract for the future, and we know that they have even signed players that they haven't even announced yet. 18-year-old Nigerian forwards. So we know that there's a lot of those changes coming. And again, we'll talk a little more about that next week. But it is, like you said, it's a much more sustainable situation. Even if they have one of those key players go down, they still have a lot of great players and even potentially more coming. So
Hmm.
there's no reason to not expect them to be near the top of the table next season as well.
For sure.
We talked about this a little bit before we actually hit record, but just the way Lowe had mentioned it. Do you remember exactly how she said it?
Yeah, I can pull it up pretty quickly here actually.
Um,
But she was talking about how um she herself was talking about how the run just felt much more sustainable than what 2022 was. And I think the question actually came from uh why is that? Oh, that was the right audio file, and I just closed it out. She was talking, I think it was a good question from Dan Lauletta that asked, if it felt any different than 2022. Um, Here we go. Yes, 2 years ago, the question was basically the disappointment was similar, but if this felt any more sustainable. So Lowe's quote was, she goes, I think that 2 years ago we got to the final on pure momentum. I think we had some luck. Then obviously the next year we weren't as great. So I think this year it hurts even more because we had all the tools, right? We just didn't fully execute it in this game, but it gives us so much hope and fire for next year because we have those tools. We know everybody who walks in that building wants to win, and it's going to give their all. So when you see it from the people on the sideline, the people on the field, people in the front office, it gives you hope and gives you support to help you win next year. So just some overall, thoughts about, the way 2022 came together versus what, actually is the case for this time out. And I think you could see too, like there was a much different feel in 2022 when the team was winning versus the way that this team was winning this year was like the level of buy-in and determination and not just, they said we're taking it one game at a time, but like it felt from the get-go there was a really clear base level of culture that was being created and laid out,
yeah,
where I don't think that necessarily there was a culture that was actually behind what was happening in 2022 that created just a whole lot of, luck. Was it
yeah,
fight of not wanting to be embarrassed for being bad again? Was it, other things like what sprung those moments, um, of success in that 2022 year? But there was a lot of it for a really good latter stretch of that NWSL season. They did go 13 games unbeaten and then won the next 4 or 5,
yeah.
pretty much. So, I think that was still a really good squad, but seemed to be a limit to the ceiling of that squad, and this does not feel that way.
A lot of 2022 success was sometimes they would be terrible for 70 minutes and then kick in 15 minutes at the end. Uh, Kristen Hamilton would just, come up with a spectacular goal. Haley Mace would do a banger, or
Hmm.
another player would step up. It'd be a lot of kind of individual brilliance. It almost felt like instead of the team was just really good.
Yeah,
This year, the team was really good and still had a lot of individual brilliance stepping up. Temois, obviously, but even when she wasn't playing, they still were able to do the job. So, any last thoughts before we I don't know. I almost want to cover the NWSL championship coming up, but we know it's Orlando and Washington. And
Washington.
yeah, Washington. I'm still from Missouri. Saturday in the evening, 7 or 7:30, whatever time it is. That's obviously easy to find.
Mhm.
It should be a good game. I will very likely be there taking photos, and just it should just be a entertaining game. It's sometimes it's good to watch games I don't have a rooting interest in. And we
Yeah.
already talked about that at the beginning, how, it means something, but sometimes it's just good to watch a game and go, and it's a little bit easier to just, okay, this happened, that happened. So,
Yeah.
all right, man. I will see you probably at a couple different events this week. I don't know if you're going to any of that stuff, but
I'll be at most of it. So see you there.
all right. I appreciate everybody listening. Thanks for everybody who's listened this year. Let us know what we can do better. Rate, subscribe, whatever all those things are that you're supposed to say every time you do these things. And I'm not a very good host because I don't. But I appreciate everybody who's listened and commented on stories and interacted in every which way, because it's been fun to meet some of you at the games. And I appreciate everybody who's a soccer fan in Kansas City, and especially the Current. We are out.